A single father helped a stranger on the road, unaware that she would save his daughter's life. When they reunited at the hospital, their lives changed forever. A story that will touch your heart. Subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from. The light drizzle of March turned the streets of New York City into a grey mirror, reflecting the yellowish lights of the street lamps that began to flicker on at dusk. David Johnson, 42, rode his faded red Honda CG 125 along the West Side Highway, his scratched helmet fogging slightly as the rain continued to fall. His calloused hands gripped the handlebars firmly, even after 14 uninterrupted hours delivering lunchboxes to offices in the downtown area. The navy blue uniform of home flavor clung to his sweaty back, and the smell of food that clung to his clothes had become so familiar that he barely noticed it anymore. In the thermal backpack on his back, there were only 2 lunchboxes left, the last remnants of a day that had started at 5 in the morning. David constantly checked the cheap digital watch on his wrist. 5:45 p.m. In 15 minutes, he needed to be at the door of Santos Dumont Elementary School to pick up his daughter, Emily. "Just 15 more minutes, my princess," he murmured to himself, accelerating a bit more as he swerved around a bus that was spewing black smoke into the humid air. It was then that he saw her. On the right side of the highway, near the entrance to the Brooklyn Bridge, a female figure stood next to a gleaming white motorcycle, a Harley-Davidson that sharply contrasted with the deteriorating urban landscape. The woman wore an immaculate black leather jacket and held an expensive full-face helmet. Even from a distance, David could see that something was wrong. His first impulse was to keep going. After all, people like her surely had insurance, 24-hour assistance, and platinum cards to solve any problem. But as he passed the woman and saw through the side mirror that she had pulled out her phone and looked desperate, something inside his chest tightened. "Damn," he muttered, slowing down. His suspicious nature, shaped by years of hard life in the tough neighborhoods, screamed at him to continue on his way. Rich people didn't need help from a dirty, tired delivery guy, but the same life that had taught him to be wary had also engraved in his soul the importance of solidarity among those who suffer. David made a U-turn at the next overpass, the engine of his CG protesting against this additional effort. As he approached the woman, she looked up from her phone, and he could see her intense green eyes, worried but determined. She was beautiful, that was undeniable, but there was something in her expression that transcended beauty, a professional seriousness that David recognized from doctors he had seen in emergency rooms when he took Emily for checkups. "Hi, sorry to bother you," David said, stopping his motorcycle a few meters ahead and removing his helmet. His black hair stuck to his sweaty forehead. "Is everything okay? I saw that your bike broke down." The woman studied him for a moment, clearly surprised by the approach. She was used to the sterile world of private hospitals, where interactions were mediated by protocols and hierarchies. Here was a simple man, his face marked by the sun and fatigue, offering help with no apparent ulterior motives. "I don't know what happened," she replied, her voice revealing an educated New York accent. "It just died. I was coming to Mount Sinai Hospital and—" She abruptly stopped, as if she had said more than she should have. David dismounted from his motorcycle and approached, his work boots making noise on the wet sidewalk. "Can I take a look? I don't know much about imported bikes, but sometimes it's just a minor issue." "Do you know anything about mechanics?" she asked, a mix of hope and skepticism in her voice. "Well, I've been working on mine since I bought it used 8 years ago. I learned the hard way. You know how it is." David crouched beside the Harley, impressed by the sophistication of the digital dashboard. "Wow, this one is really top-notch. It must have cost the price of a house." The woman almost smiled at his brutal honesty. "I'm Dr. Carolina Mendez," she said, extending her gloved hand. David Johnson, he replied, quickly wiping his hand on his pants before shaking hers. Nice to meet you, doctor. What field do you work in? Pediatric cardiology, Carolina replied, watching as David carefully examined the motorcycle's cables, as if fearing to break something very expensive. David's heart skipped a beat. Pediatric cardiologist. Automatically, he thought of Emily and the times he had worried when she complained of fatigue after playing at school. That must be a heavy job, he commented, trying to identify the problem with the bike. It is, Carolina sighed, glancing at her gold wristwatch. Especially when you're late for an emergency surgery. At that moment, David understood the urgency in her voice. It wasn't the impatience of a spoiled rich person. It was the anguish of a professional who knew that a child depended on her. "Doctor, look here," he said, pointing to a loose cable near the battery. "I think this cable came loose. It must have been the jolt from a pothole." Carolina crouched down beside him, and David could smell the expensive perfume mixed with the scent of the hospital, that characteristic odor of hand sanitizer and antibacterial soap that clung to her skin. "Do you think you can fix it?" "Let's try," David said, carefully reattaching the cable. "Start it up to C." Carolina climbed onto the bike and pressed the start button. The engine purred smoothly, the dashboard lit up in blue and green, and she let out a deep sigh of relief. "It worked. Thank you so much. You have no idea how much—" She stopped mid-sentence and opened her bag. "How much do I owe you? At least for the ride here, right?" David stood up, wiping his hands. A pair of hands wiped on a cloth taken from his pocket. "No need to worry, doctor. It was just connecting a cable." "What do you mean, no need? You stopped everything you were doing to help me." "That's just how it is," David shrugged, putting his full-face helmet back on. "You're going to save a child. I'm not charging anything for that." Emily remained silent for a few seconds, studying the man who refused payment on principle, not out of false modesty. "How can I thank you, then?" "No need to thank me, doctor. Just take good care of the child waiting for you, okay?" David mounted his motorcycle, took one last look to ensure she was all right, and waved. "Good luck with the surgery." As he rode away, Emily stood still for a few moments, watching the red motorcycle disappear into the traffic. There was something about that man, a genuine kindness she rarely found in her world of air-conditioned offices and competitive colleagues. David accelerated towards the school, his heart still warmed by the sincere gratitude he had seen in the doctor's green eyes. He had no idea that those 15 minutes of delay would completely change the course of his life and his daughter's in the coming months. The clock read 6:02 p.m. when he finally stopped in front of the school, breathless. Emily was already waiting for him at the entrance, her pink backpack on her back and a smile that lit up David's tired face. "Hi, Dad. I thought you forgot about me." "Never, Princess," David said, helping her onto the back of the motorcycle. "I just helped a doctor on the road, a doctor with a heart for children." The two-bedroom apartment in the Maple Grove housing complex was small, but David had turned every inch into a cozy home for Emily. The living room walls were decorated with drawings she had made at school, colorful houses with families of 3, always including an imaginary mother figure that she insisted on drawing even though she had never known her mother. "Dad, tell me again about the doctor you helped," Emily asked while finishing her homework at the kitchen table, her little legs swinging on the blue plastic chair. David smiled as he warmed up the leftovers from his lunchbox, chicken casserole with rice and crispy potatoes. The homemade smell filled the small space, mixing with the scent of fabric softener he always used on his daughter's clothes. "Oh, Emily, I've already told you 3 times today," he replied, carefully serving her plate. "She was a very elegant doctor with an expensive motorcycle, but she was in trouble on the road. And you helped her for free, right, Dad?" Of course, Princess. We help those in need, don't we? Especially when the person is going to take care of other children. Emily nodded seriously, as if she perfectly understood her father's moral logic. At 8 years old, she had developed a maturity common in children raised by hard-working single parents. She knew money was tight, that her dad worked hard, and that they had to take care of each other. "Dad, today in gym class I got tired really quickly," she casually commented, playing with her rice on her fork. David stopped eating and looked at her attentively. "What do you mean, tired?" "Oh, I don't know. The teacher asked us to run around the gym, and I couldn't finish. I got really out of breath." "You had a cold these past few days, Emily. That must be why," David said, trying to sound calm, but a pang of worry crossed his chest. "Tomorrow, take it easier in gym class, okay?" 3 weeks passed since the encounter on the road, and David had practically forgotten the episode. His routine had returned to normal, waking up at 5 in the morning, preparing coffee and Emily's lunch, dropping her off at school, working all day, delivering lunchboxes, picking her up at 6 in the evening, helping with homework, having dinner together, and going to bed early to repeat it all the next day. But Emily's episodes of tiredness began to occur more frequently. "Mr. Johnson, can I talk to you for a minute?" Ms. Smith called him to a corner of the schoolyard on a rainy Thursday. She was a middle-aged woman, with grey hair tied in a bun and reading glasses hanging around her neck. David felt his stomach tighten. Conversations with teachers were never good news. "Sure, Miss Smith. Did Emily get into trouble?" No, that's not it. Emily is an exemplary girl, you know that." Miss Smith glanced towards the classroom where the children were storing their materials. "It's just that I've noticed she's been quieter lately. During physical activities, she sits out, saying she's tired." "Yeah, she's mentioned that at home too," David admitted, running his hand through his damp hair from the rain. "I thought it was just typical kid laziness, you know how it is." "It could be, but—" Ms. Smith hesitated. "Have you thought about taking her to the doctor? Just to make sure everything is all right?" David nodded, but inside he knew that a doctor's visit meant missing work, waiting in long lines at the clinic, and possibly spending money he didn't have on tests. "I will, Miss Smith. Thank you for letting me know." That night, while Emily slept in her single bed in the only room of the apartment, David stayed awake in the living room, lying on the couch that served as his bed. The old television was broadcasting a low-volume game show, but he wasn't paying attention. His mind was focused on the past few days, Emily refusing to play tag, with the neighbors, complaining of chest pain after climbing the stairs in the building, going to bed earlier than usual. On his simple cell phone, he searched "tired child symptoms," but the vague information online only heightened his anxiety. It could be anything from anemia to more serious issues he didn't even want to consider. On the following Friday, David managed to take a day off work, which meant losing a full day's pay, to take Emily to the neighborhood clinic. They arrived at 6 in the morning to get in line for tickets, and they were only seen at 2 in the afternoon. Dr. Sarah, the general practitioner at the clinic, was a young woman, freshly graduated, who was trying to do her best with limited resources. She carefully examined Emily, listened to her heart with an old stethoscope, checked her throat, and measured her blood pressure with that manual device David only saw in old movies. "Her heart is racing," the doctor commented, slightly furrowing her brow. "It could be anxiety, or it might be a nutritional issue. I'll order some basic tests, a blood test and a blood sugar test." "Doctor, how long will the results take?" David asked, holding Emily's small hand. "About 15 days. But if she gets worse, if she has severe shortness of breath or faints, you bring her to the emergency room immediately, okay?" David left the clinic feeling like he hadn't resolved anything. 15 days felt like an eternity when it came to the health of the only person he loved in the world. Over the weekend, he tried to maintain normalcy. He took Emily for ice cream at the neighborhood park. They watched cartoons together, and she helped him wash his motorcycle on Sunday morning. A tradition they kept religiously. "Dad, why do you keep looking at me with that worried face?" Emily asked while wiping the rear wheel of the bike. David laughed, realizing he wasn't being very discreet. "It's nothing, Princess. Daddy is just thinking about work." "You work too much, Dad. Miss Smith said you're the most dedicated dad at school." "Miss Smith really said that?" "She did. She said you never miss meetings, always pick me up on time, and that my homework is always the best in the class." David felt his eyes welling up. Sometimes he wondered if he was being a good father, if Emily missed having a mother, if he could give her everything she deserved. "Dad, are you crying?" "No, it's just soap that got in my eye," David lied, hugging his daughter. "I love you so much, Emmy. You know that, right?" "I love you too, Dad. And you know what else?" "What?" "I don't need anything else, just you." David hugged her tighter, feeling her small heart beating against his chest. Beating too fast, he noted with a shiver of fear. On Monday, while making his deliveries around the city, David couldn't stop thinking about the 15 days left for the test results. At every traffic light, he checked his phone, hoping for a call from the school. With every customer receiving their lunchbox, he wondered if Emily was okay at that very moment. It was as if the universe was preparing the ground for something bigger, something that would change their lives forever. But David still couldn't imagine that the answer to his fears was closer than he thought. In the form of a pediatric cardiologist, he had helped on a rainy afternoon in March. The auditorium of Maple Grove Elementary School was decorated with pink crepe paper flowers and red balloons for the special Mother's Day presentation. David had managed to leave work early, missing 2 important deliveries, to watch Emily recite the poem she had been practicing for weeks at home. Sitting in the 3rd row of white plastic chairs, he held his old phone in his sweaty hands, ready to record every second of the performance. The smell of cheap perfume from the other mothers mixed with the aroma of cornbread that the cafeteria staff had prepared for after the event. David observed the families around him. Well-dressed mothers, some with husbands, children dressed in clothes bought especially for the occasion. He had ironed the only dress shirt he owned and bought a new pair of shoes for Emily with the money he had been saving for the motorcycle brake repair. "Now let's watch the 3rd grade class's performance," announced Ms. Smith over the slightly crackling microphone. "They prepared a very special tribute for their moms." The children climbed onto the small makeshift stage. Emily was in the 2nd row, wearing the navy blue dress David had bought from a street vendor, her brown hair tied in 2, pigtails adorned with white bows. She waved discreetly to her dad, who returned with a proud smile that lit up his tired face. The music began, an instrumental version of Mommy by Angela Maria, and the children started reciting in unison. David filmed everything, his heart tight with emotion and melancholy. Emily had never known her mother, who had left home when she was only 8 months old, leaving only a letter saying she wasn't ready to be a mother. "Mommy, you are my safe harbor, my star in the sky, my purest love." The children's voices echoed through the packed auditorium, and David saw Emily reciting with dedication, as if the words were directed to a present mother, alive in her imagination. Then it happened. In the middle of the 3rd verse, Emily faltered. David initially thought she had forgotten the words, but then he saw that she was pale, bringing her small hand to her chest. The girl next to her continued reciting, but Emily stopped completely, her eyes losing focus. "Emmy," David murmured, rising from his chair. Emily stumbled back, her knees giving way as if they were made of jelly. Ms. Smith, who was at the side of the stage, immediately noticed that something was wrong and moved toward the girl, but she wasn't quick enough. Emily collapsed on the stage floor with a dull thud that made the entire auditorium fell into absolute silence. "Emily!" David shouted, leaping over chairs and running towards the stage. The world around him transformed into slow motion. The other children stopped reciting. The mothers stood up, startled. The microphone fell to the ground with a thud that reverberated through the speakers. David jumped onto the stage in 2 bounds, kneeling beside his daughter. Emily was unconscious, her skin pale as paper, her lips slightly bluish. He picked her up, feeling how light she was, too fragile. "Someone call an ambulance!" shouted Ms. Smith, already pulling her phone from her pocket. "No, there's no time." David stood up with Emily in his arms. "I'll take her to the hospital." "David, wait! Let the ambulance—" Miss Smith tried to argue, but he was already running down the school corridor, his daughter unconscious in his arms, his heart pounding in his chest like an unregulated engine. The helmet was thrown haphazardly on his head, and Emily was positioned between his arms and the handlebars of the motorcycle. David had never driven so fast and yet so carefully in his life. Every pothole in the road felt like an abyss, every red traffic light an eternity. "Hang in there, princess. Hang in there," he murmured as he weaved through traffic, the horn of the motorcycle sounding desperately. "Daddy's taking you to the doctor. Everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay." The nearest local hospital was 15 minutes from the school, but David made the trip in 8. He parked the motorcycle on the sidewalk, not caring about tickets or towing, and rushed to the entrance of the pediatric emergency room with Emily still unconscious in his arms. "Help! My daughter has fainted!" he shouted to the receptionist, who immediately alerted the on-call team. A nurse appeared with a small stretcher, and David placed Emily down with extreme care, as if she were made of crystal. "What happened?" the nurse asked as they rushed through the white hallways that smelled of disinfectant. "She was performing at school and suddenly collapsed. She's been complaining of fatigue lately, had tests done at the clinic, but the results aren't out yet." They arrived at an emergency room where a young doctor was waiting for them. David immediately recognized the type. A recent graduate doing her residency in public service before landing a better job. She examined Emily quickly, checking her eyelids, listening to her heart, checking her blood pressure. "Her pulse is very rapid," she murmured to the nurse. "Let's do an EKG." As they connected the electrodes to Emily's small chest, David held his daughter's hand, whispering words of comfort. "I'll stay right here with you, princess. Nothing's going to happen to you." "Sir, are you the father?" A firm, yet gentle female voice caught his attention. David looked up and could hardly believe it. There was the woman he had helped on the highway 3 weeks ago. Dr. Sarah Johnson, now wearing a white coat over a light blue blouse, her blonde hair tied back in a practical ponytail, a professional yet concerned expression on her face. "Doctor, you," David stammered, completely confused. "What are you doing here?" Sarah looked at the medical chart and then at David, the memory clicking instantly. The man who had stopped to help her in the rain, refusing any payment. The lunchbox delivery guy who had told her to take good care of the child waiting for her. "I'm a pediatric cardiologist. They called me because they suspect it could be something with the heart." She approached the stretcher, her professional instinct overriding the surprise of their reunion. "What's her name?" "Emily. Everyone calls her Emmy." David's voice was choked. "Doctor, she's going to be okay, right? She's all I have in the world." Sarah looked into the desperate eyes of the man who had shown so much kindness without expecting anything in return, and felt her heart tighten. She examined the electrocardiogram that had just printed, slightly furrowing her brow. "I'll examine her personally," Sarah said, pulling out her stethoscope. "Can you tell me exactly what happened? When did the symptoms start?" While she listened to Emily's heart, and David recounted the episodes of fatigue from the past weeks, Sarah felt that fate had created a strange and powerful connection between their lives. The girl she was now examining was the daughter of the man who had stopped everything to help her when she needed to get to the hospital to save another child. And now, perhaps it was her turn to return that generosity. The next 3 hours turned into the longest eternity David had ever lived. Emily had regained consciousness but remained pale and drowsy on the stretcher, connected to monitors that emitted constant reassuring beeps. David never let go of his daughter's small hand, as if his touch could keep her safe in the world. Sarah had ordered a series of tests, echocardiogram, chest X-ray, specific blood tests, and now David waited for the results sitting on a plastic chair in the corridor, his work uniform wrinkled and still smelling of the lunchboxes from the day. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to process the impossible coincidence of having encountered the doctor he had helped again. "Daddy, is everything okay?" Emily had woken up just a few minutes ago, her voice weak but present. "Everything's fine, Princess. You just had a little scare at school. The doctor will find out what it was, and you'll be as good as new." Sarah appeared in the corridor holding a folder with test results, but her professional expression couldn't hide her concern. She sat in a chair next to David, keeping her voice low so Emily wouldn't hear. "David, I need to talk to you about the results." His stomach dropped. "Is it serious, doctor?" "Emily has a condition called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It's a problem with the heart muscle that can cause exactly the symptoms she's been experiencing: fatigue, shortness of breath, fainting episodes." David stared at her, not fully understanding, but knowing that they were too big to be simple things. "Is there a cure?" Sarah hesitated. "It's a condition that needs to be closely monitored. There is treatment, but—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "David, her case is complex. She will need specialized care, more detailed tests, possibly specific medication. Doctor, tell me the truth. Is it dangerous?" Sarah looked into the eyes of the man who had shown such generosity to a stranger and decided to be completely honest. "It can be, if not treated properly, but with the right care she can lead a normal life." David ran his hands through his hair, trying to process the information. "How much does this care cost?" It was Sarah's turn to hesitate. She knew that Medicaid offered treatment, but the waiting lists were long, the care inconsistent, and cases like Emily's required constant monitoring. Through Medicaid, it will take a few months to get the specialized appointments. "A few months?" David stood up abruptly. "Doctor, you just said it's dangerous." "David, sit down. Let's talk calmly." Sarah pulled him back into the chair. "I can personally oversee her case." David looked at her incredulously. "Do you accept Medicaid?" "No, I work in a private hospital, but—" Sarah stopped, realizing she was offering something that violated all protocols of her career. "You helped me that day on the highway. You refused any payment. You told me to take good care of the child waiting, and for me. But that has nothing to do with it, Doctor." "It does." Sarah's voice was firm. "You stopped everything you were doing to help a stranger. You didn't even accept gas money. And now I find out that the daughter of the person who helped me needs exactly the kind of care I can provide." David shook his head. "Doctor, I sincerely appreciate it, but I can't afford a private consultation. What I earn barely covers rent and food." "I'm not asking for payment." "What do you mean?" Sarah stood up and began to walk down the corridor, her hands in the pockets of her lab coat. David followed her with his eyes, confused and hopeful at the same time. "David, I specialized in pediatric cardiology because when I was 8 years old, the same age as Emily, my father had a heart attack and died while waiting in the public emergency room. I waited 4 hours for someone to examine him properly." She stopped walking and faced him. "I swore that when I graduated, I would never let a child wait in line when I could help. David felt his eyes welling up. Doctor, I can't accept charity. It's not charity. It's reciprocity. Sarah sat down next to him again. You helped me when I needed it. Now it's my turn to help you. But it's very different, Doctor. I just plugged in a cable. You helped me save a life that day. I made it to the surgery on time because of you. Now, let me try to save this life here. David looked out the corridor window. The sun was setting over New York City, painting the sky orange and pink. In a few hours, he would have to pick Emily up from school to take her home, make dinner, help with homework, if everything were normal, but nothing would be normal after that day. Doctor, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, just let me take care of Emily. Sarah smiled for the first time since she had arrived at the hospital. And you can call me Sarah. After all, we are friends now. Sarah, David repeated the name, trying out the informality. I'm very proud, you know. I've always raised Emily on my own, always managed everything. But now you will continue managing everything. You just won't be alone. At that moment, Emily called them from the stretcher. Dad, can I have some water? David rushed to her, followed by Sarah. Of course, Princess. How are you feeling? Better. This doctor is pretty, Emily whispered in her father's ear, loud enough for Sarah to hear. Sarah laughed, approaching the stretcher. Hi, Emily. I'm Sarah. Your dad helped me once when my motorcycle broke down. Really? Emily looked at David with admiration. My dad helps everyone. He's the best dad in the world. I can see that, said Sarah, checking the monitors. And you know what else? Now I'm going to help your dad take care of you. We're going to be a team. A team? Emily smiled faintly. Like the Avengers? David and Sarah laughed together, and for a moment the tension of the hospital dissipated. Exactly, said Sarah. Like the Avengers. Your dad is Captain America, always doing the right thing. I'm Black Widow, good at medicine. And you... Who am I? Emily asked, excited. You are the most powerful one of all. You are the heart of the team. David felt that for the first time since Emily had fainted, maybe everything would be all right. Perhaps that elegant doctor he had met in the rain was indeed the angel his daughter needed. He didn't know that Sarah was also thinking the same thing, that perhaps this simple, generous man was exactly the kind of genuine kindness her cold, calculated professional life needed to encounter. 2 weeks after the hospital episode, David found himself in a situation he never imagined he would live. Waiting in a private consultation room in the Upper East Side, observing sophisticated aquariums and abstract paintings on the walls. The smell was different, not the hospital odor of disinfectant, but a subtle lavender scent discreetly coming from the air conditioning. Emily was sitting next to him, swinging her legs in a beige leather armchair that cost more than David's 3-month salary. Dad, that fish over there looks like Nemo, Emily whispered, pointing to the saltwater aquarium that occupied an entire wall. David sat in the reception area. That's right, Princess, he replied, nervously adjusting the dress shirt he had bought second-hand at a thrift store specifically for the appointments. He felt completely out of place in an environment where other families wore expensive clothes and spoke softly about international trips and private schools. Mr. David Johnson? The receptionist, a young blonde woman with perfectly styled hair, called out with a professional smile, Dr. Sarah will see you now. Dr. Sarah's office was even more impressive than the reception area. A glass desk occupied the center, surrounded by framed diplomas from universities that David only knew by name. There was a shelf filled with medical books in English, Spanish, and what he assumed was French. On the wall were photos of Sarah at international medical conferences, always impeccably dressed in elegant suits. Hi, Emily, how are you feeling? Sarah stood up from the desk, instantly swapping her formal lab coat for a warmer demeanor. "Hi, Aunt Carol, I'm feeling much better. I haven't been as tired this week," Emily replied, running to hug Sarah. David watched the interaction, still processing how drastically his life had changed. Over the past 2 weeks, Sarah had taken on Emily's case with a dedication that went far beyond professionalism. She called every day to check on how the girl was doing, adjusted medications based on her body's response, and even more impressively, had managed to schedule all the specialized tests that would typically take months to arrange through Medicaid. "David, sit here," Sarah indicated the chair, "in front of the desk. I brought the results of the latest tests." As Sarah explained the numbers and graphs that David could barely comprehend, he found himself observing the details that revealed who she really was. The discreet, yet clearly expensive wristwatch, her well-manicured hands free of rings, the way she simplified complex medical terms for him to understand, never making him feel dumb or ignorant. "The medication is working well," Sarah explained, showing a graph on the computer. "Emily's heart is responding positively, but we need to continue close monitoring." "Doctor." "Sarah," David corrected himself. "I still don't understand why you're doing all this for us." Sarah stopped speaking and looked at Emily, who was engrossed in playing with a medical tablet showing a 3D heart. "Can I be completely honest with you?" "Of course." "That day on Fifth Avenue, when you helped me, I was coming from a terrible meeting at the hospital. My colleagues had criticized me for spending too much time with patients who couldn't afford private treatment. They said I was being financially unviable for the clinic." David furrowed his brow. "And that bothered you?" "It destroyed me," Sarah admitted. "I graduated to save lives, not to be a money-making machine. When you helped me and refused any payment, you reminded me why I chose medicine. But that's very different from what you're doing now." "It is, but it isn't." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, observing the hustle and bustle of Fifth Avenue. "David, do you have any idea how many patients I see daily who could be treated perfectly well in the public system, but pay privately for convenience, while children like Emily wait months for an appointment?" David didn't know how to respond. He had never thought about the healthcare system from that perspective. "When I take care of Emily, I remember why I became a doctor. When I see the gratitude in her eyes, when I see how you both take care of each other, I remember that medicine is about people, not about money." "Aunt Carol," Emily interrupted the conversation, "the little heart on the tablet is dancing to the music." Sarah laughed and returned to the desk. "That's right, Emily. Your heart is learning to dance to the right rhythm again." At that moment, David's phone rang. It was from the Lunchbox Company. "Hello?" "Yes, Mr. Smith. What do you mean you cancelled the orders?" David's voice tensed. "But why? I only missed a couple of days this week." "I understand, yes, sir." David hung up the phone with a grim expression. Sarah immediately sensed that something was wrong. Did something happen? "I lost 3 clients this week," David said, running his hand through his hair, "because of the absences to bring Emily to her appointments." Sarah felt a pang of guilt. She hadn't considered the practical implications of her decision to personally oversee the case. "David, I'm so sorry. We can adjust the appointment times." "No, doctor, Emily comes first, always." David stood up, determined. "I'll figure it out. I always do." But Sarah knew he was struggling with this. She saw it in the clothes he wore. Always the same, impeccably clean, but visibly old. She noticed it in his simple phone, worn shoes, and the way he counted every penny when paying for hospital parking. "David, I have a proposal for you." He looked at her suspiciously. "What kind of proposal?" "I need someone I can trust to help me with a few things. Delivering tests to laboratories, picking up special medications, sometimes accompanying patients during transfers." Sarah was improvising, but the idea made sense. "It's a part-time job, but I would pay well. Doctor, it's not charity, David. It's real work. I genuinely need help with these things, and after everything I've seen, I know I can trust you completely. David fell silent, pride battling against practical need. Emily looked between the two adults, sensing the tension in the air even without fully understanding what was happening. "Dad," she said softly, "Aunt Carol is our friend. Friends help each other, right?" David looked at his daughter, then at Sarah, who was waiting for his response with genuine anxiety. "All right," he finally said, "but it has to be real work. I don't want to be a favor." "Real work," Sarah confirmed, extending her hand. "Partners?" David shook her hand, feeling as though he was crossing an invisible line between two very different worlds. "Partners!" Emily clapped her hands, as if she had just David Johnson had witnessed something very important, without knowing that he had witnessed the moment when three lonely lives began to intertwine irreversibly. Outside the window of the office, New York City continued its frantic pace, unaware that in a small office in the Upper East Side, a lunchbox delivery man, a pediatric cardiologist, and an 8-year-old girl were planting the seeds of something that would change their lives forever. The first month working with Sarah was a constant revelation for David. His routine had completely transformed. Instead of leaving at 5 in the morning to deliver lunchboxes, he now took Emily to school and then headed to the office, where Sarah was already waiting for him with a list of tasks that took him to the most sophisticated corners of New York City. On that May morning, David was standing in front of the lab in Midtown, holding a thermal box with blood samples that needed urgent analysis. The uniform that Sarah had made for him, a navy blue polo shirt with the clinic's logo and black dress pants, made him feel more respected, but still out of place in that universe of glass towers and imported cars. "Good morning. I'm here to deliver the samples from Dr. Sarah Johnson," he said to the receptionist, a middle-aged woman who greeted him with professional cordiality. "Of course, Mr. Johnson. The results will be ready tomorrow at 2 p.m. David nodded, checking his watch. He still had time to pick up the special medications at the compounding pharmacy in Brooklyn before returning to the office. As he rode his motorcycle through the busy streets, he reflected on how his life had changed radically in just a few weeks. Sarah had kept her word. The job was real, with important responsibilities. He transported delicate tests, picked up medications that cost more than his old monthly salary, and sometimes accompanied elderly patients or those with mobility issues to the office. The salary she paid was fair, more than he earned delivering. Lunchboxes with more flexible hours that allowed him to be present in Emily's life, but not everything was perfect. When he arrived at the office around 10 o'clock, David noticed that the atmosphere was tense. Sarah was on the phone, her voice controlled but clearly irritated. "Dr. Henry, with all due respect, my methods do not affect the clinic's productivity. Yes, I understand your concerns. No, I can't discuss this right now. I have patients waiting." Sarah hung up the phone with excessive force, running her hands through her hair in frustration. It was then that she noticed David, standing in the doorway. "Sorry, David. Problems at the hospital. Can I help with anything?" Sarah sighed, indicating the chair in front of her desk. "Sit down. I think you need to know some things." David settled in, concerned about the seriousness in her tone. "What I'm going to tell you can't leave this room, okay?" Sarah looked at him intensely. "Some of my colleagues at Mount Sinai Hospital are questioning my personal involvement with some cases." Personal involvement. They know that I'm following Emily without charging. They know that I hired you, and they think that's inappropriate. David felt his stomach tighten. "Doctor, if this is causing you trouble..." "It's not that, David." Sarah stood up and walked to the window. The problem is that they are trying to force me to choose between my career and my principles. What do you mean? Dr. Henry, who is the head of pediatric cardiology, gave me an ultimatum. Either I go back to focusing only on private patients, or they will question my position on the hospital staff. David was silent for a few seconds, processing the information. And what does that mean? It means I could lose my main job. This office. Here is just a supplement. My real income comes from the hospital. Doctor, David stood up, clearly agitated. I can't be the reason you lose your job. Emily and I will manage. David, stop. Sarah turned to him, her eyes shining with determination. You don't understand. I won't give up my principles because of medical politics. But your career. My career is worth nothing if I can't help those who really need it. Sarah returned to her desk, opening a drawer from which she took out a folder. Actually, I have a proposal for you. David looked at her, suspicious. What kind of proposal? I'm thinking of leaving the hospital and opening an independent clinic. A clinic that serves both private patients and social cases like Emily's. Sarah opened the folder, showing documents and blueprints. I've already found a space in Brooklyn, near public hospitals. It would be a bridge between the two worlds. David examined the papers, not quite understanding what he was seeing. And what would my role be in this? As a partner. What do you mean? David almost shouted. Calm down, let me explain. Sarah laughed at his reaction. Not a financial partner, an operational partner. You would be responsible for all the logistics, scheduling, transporting tests, contacting labs, coordinating with public hospitals. You would be essential for the operation. David shook his head, incredulous. Doctor, I don't have the education for that. David, in the past few weeks, you've learned more about the healthcare system in New York City than many doctors know. You understand the reality of those who need Medicaid, and now you also know how private medicine works. You would be the perfect bridge. But what if it goes wrong? What if the clinic doesn't work? Then we go back to what we were doing before, Sarah said simply. David, I'm leaving the hospital anyway, with or without you, but I'd prefer to have someone I trust by my side on this journey. David stood up and began to walk around the office, trying to process the proposal. And Emily? Her treatment? It would be the top priority at the new clinic, and she would receive the care she deserves always. At that moment, David's phone rang. It was from Emily's school. Hello? Yes, I'm the father of Emily. What do you mean she got sick? David's tone changed completely. I'm heading there now. David hung up the phone, his face pale. Emily got sick at school. She's in the nurse's office. Let's go, Sarah said, already grabbing the car keys. My car is faster than your motorcycle. As they ran through the parking lot toward Sarah's silver Ford Explorer, David realized once again that she had set aside everything she was doing to help them. It wasn't her obligation. It wasn't a professional responsibility. It was simply who she had chosen to be. During the drive to the school, while Sarah skillfully navigated through heavy traffic, David made his decision. Sarah, he said, using her first name informally for the first time outside the hospital. About your proposal. We'll talk about that later, David. Right now, let's take care of Emily. No, it's important. David looked at her with determination. If you're sure you want to do this, I'm in, but with one condition. What? We do it the right way. As true partners. I learn everything I need to learn, study what's necessary, and earn this chance. Sarah smiled for the first time that day, a mix of relief and pride in her eyes. True partners. As they parked in front of the school, David knew he was making the riskiest decision of his life. But looking at Sarah, who was already running toward the school entrance without caring about her high heels or expensive suit, he knew he had chosen the right person to bet on for his family's future. The warehouse in Brooklyn smelled of fresh paint and sawdust when David arrived on Monday morning, carrying 2 lunchboxes of breakfast he had prepared at home. Emily was at school, and he had decided to use the early hours of the day to work on the renovation of the future clinic. Sarah was already there, wearing jeans and a white t-shirt, the first time David had seen her without formal clothes, measuring spaces with a tape measure and taking notes in a notebook. "I brought coffee and cinnamon rolls for you," David said, extending the lunchbox. "I thought you weren't used to having coffee in the morning." Sarah stopped what she was doing and looked at the lunchbox with genuine surprise. "David, you didn't have to." "Of course I did. We're partners now, remember? Partners take care of each other." They sat in 2 plastic chairs in the middle of what would be the reception area, eating homemade cinnamon rolls and drinking freshly brewed coffee from a thermos that David had brought. Around them, piles of construction materials shared space with architectural plans and medical equipment catalogues. "I never thought I would like cinnamon rolls so much," Sarah said, savoring the second slice. "My grandmother used to make them like this when I was a kid, but after she passed away, I never had them again." "Emily learned to make them with me," David smiled with pride. "She wakes up early on Sundays just so we can make them together." Sarah watched David as he spoke about his daughter, noticing how his whole face lit up. In the past few weeks, working together, she had discovered layers of his personality that she hadn't expected. David was not just a dedicated and hard-working father. He had an impressive practical intelligence, a problem-solving ability that she rarely saw in her fellow doctors. "David, can I ask you a personal question?" "Sure." "Emily's mother, do you miss her?" David was silent for a few seconds, stirring his coffee with a plastic spoon. "You know what the truth is? I hardly remember what it was like to live with her. Emily was so little when she left. Sometimes I just feel anger. That she missed the chance to know the amazing girl Emily has become. I don't miss the woman who left. I feel angry that she gave up on her daughter without even trying." Sarah nodded, understanding more than he imagined. "My dad also left when I was a kid. Not by choice, but the result was the same." "Is that why you became a pediatric cardiologist?" "Partly," Sarah admitted. "I think all our choices have to do with what we experienced when we were little, don't you?" They were interrupted by the sound of a drill coming from the back of the warehouse, where the workers had arrived to continue the construction. David stood up, putting the empty lunchboxes in his backpack. "I'm going to check on the progress of the offices," he said, pulling out a notebook where he wrote everything related to the construction. Sarah watched him approach the workers, greeting each one by name, asking about the progress of the work with genuine knowledge about construction. In the past few weeks, David had dedicated himself to learning about hospital architecture, health regulations, medical equipment, as if he were studying for an exam that depended on his life. And maybe that was exactly it. "Mr. Johnson," called Jack the foreman, a man in his 50s with calloused hands and an easy smile. "The electrical installation for the offices will be ready today. Tomorrow we can start painting." "Perfect, Jack. And what about the special outlets for the medical equipment?" "Everything according to the plan. The doctor will be satisfied." David made his notes in the notebook, checking deadlines and budgets he had memorized in recent days. Sarah approached, impressed with his organization. "How are you managing to keep track of all this?" she asked. "YouTube," David replied simply. "Emily taught me how to use it. There's a video for everything there. I learned about hospital wiring, safety regulations, even about autoclaves." Sarah laughed, shaking her head. "David, you surprise me every day." "Why?" "Most people I know would need to take a technical course to understand these things. You're learning on your own out of necessity. It's because this isn't just a project for me. It's just a job for me. David looked at her seriously. It's my daughter's future. It's our chance to do something truly important. At that moment, Sarah's phone rang. It was Dr. Henry from Mount Sinai Hospital. "Hello, Dr. Henry. Yes, I completely understand your position. No, I'm not going back. I understand, thank you." Sarah hung up the phone with a tight expression. David immediately sensed it was more bad news. "Did something happen?" "They officially terminated my employment at the hospital. I have 2 weeks to organize the transfer of my patients." David felt a knot in his stomach. "Sarah, are you sure about what you're doing? There's still time to back out." "David, stop." Sarah interrupted him, but not angrily. "Do you think I would make a decision like this if I wasn't absolutely sure?" "But what if it doesn't work out? What if the clinic can't sustain itself?" Sarah looked around the construction site, then back at David, with his paint-smeared shirt and notebook in hand. "You know what I've discovered working with you these past few weeks? That I was so focused on succeeding in my career that I forgot why I wanted to be a doctor." She stepped closer to him. "David, in the last 2 months, I've saved more lives and felt more fulfilled professionally than in the last 2 years at the hospital. Because of Emily? Because of you all. Because I discovered that medicine isn't about status or money. It's about caring for the people who need it." David nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility. "Then let's make this work." "Let's," Sarah agreed. "But David, there's something I need to tell you." "Go ahead." "I've never had a real family. My parents died young. I have no siblings. I've never been married." She hesitated before continuing. "Working with you all taking care of Emily, I kind of discovered what it's like to have a family." David looked at her in silence, understanding what she wasn't saying directly. "Sarah, you will always have a place in our family. Emily already considers you an aunt, and he paused, searching for the right words. "I consider you the best friend I've ever had." "Friend," Sarah repeated, smiling. "I like that." They were interrupted by Jack, who approached with an excited expression. "Dr. David, Dr. Sarah, come see the first office ready." They walked to the back of the construction site, where a small but functional room was completely finished. White walls, hospital-grade vinyl flooring, LED lighting, special outlets for medical equipment. It was simple, but professional. "Wow," Sarah murmured. "It's perfect." David entered the room, imagining Sarah seeing patients there, picturing Emily having consultations in the space they had created together. For the first time since they had started the project, he truly believed it would work. "In 2 weeks we'll open," Jack said proudly. David and Sarah exchanged glances, knowing that in 2 weeks their lives would change completely once again. But this time, they were building their own destiny, brick by brick, dream by dream. And Emily would have the best pediatric cardiologist in New York City taking care of her in an office that her father had helped build with his own hands. The Heart in Motion clinic had been operating for 3 weeks when the first major problem arose. David arrived on Tuesday morning and found Sarah at the reception, surrounded by papers and wearing a worried expression he hadn't seen in days. "What happened?" he asked, leaving the backpack with snacks he always brought for them on the reception desk. "Health department," Sarah sighed, showing an official document. "They came for a surprise inspection yesterday afternoon. They found some irregularities." David felt his stomach tighten. What kind of irregularities? "Nothing serious, but it could cause us problems. Lack of signage in some rooms, a fire extinguisher that was past its recharge date, and—" She hesitated. "They questioned our mixed service model." "What do you mean?" "They find it strange that we treat private patients and Medicaid patients in the same space. They want to understand better how our methodology works." David pulled up a chair and sat next to her, reviewing the document. In recent weeks, he had studied so much about regulations that he could understand most of what was written. How long do we have to fix this? 15 days. If we don't regularize everything, they can suspend our operating license. They were interrupted by the arrival of the first patient of the day, Mrs. Johnson, a 68-year-old woman who had been referred by the local hospital for post-surgical follow-up. David greeted her with the warmth he reserved for all patients. "Good morning, Mrs. Johnson. How are you feeling?" "Oh, David, my dear, every day better. This doctor of yours is an angel," she replied, addressing Sarah with a toothless smile. "Doctor, I brought the test you asked for." While Sarah attended to Mrs. Johnson, David headed to the small office they had set up at the back of the clinic. There, he organized all the administrative tasks, scheduling, contacts with labs, financial control, and now health regulations. His phone rang. It was from Emily's school. "Daddy, can you pick me up early today?" His daughter's voice sounded tired. "I'm feeling a little nauseous." David immediately became alert. Since they had adjusted her medication, Emily had been stable, but any different symptom worried him. "Of course, Princess. I'll be there in 20 minutes. David found Sarah finishing up with Mrs. Johnson and explained the situation. She immediately cancelled the next patient to examine Emily. "Go, pick her up. When you both return, I'll take a look at her," Sarah said, already grabbing the stethoscope. On the way to the school, David reflected on how his worries had multiplied. Before, he only worried about Emily and paying the bills. Now, he felt responsible for the clinic, for the patients who depended on them, for the career that Sarah had risked. Emily was in the infirmary at school, a bit pale but conscious. "Hi, Daddy. I think it was something I ate." Let's check with Aunt Sarah," said David, helping his daughter get up. Back at the clinic, Sarah examined Emily thoroughly. David watched every expression on the doctor's face, trying to decipher if something was wrong. "It's just a gastric discomfort," Sarah reassured. "Maybe something didn't sit well. The heart is perfect." David sighed in relief, but Emily, lying on the examination table, made an observation that surprised both adults. "Aunt Sarah, why are you and Dad so nervous lately? Did you have a fight?" David and Sarah exchanged glances. They hadn't realized that the tension from the opening and the clinic's issues was affecting their behavior. "We didn't fight, sweetheart." David sat on the edge of the table. "It's just that we're having some problems at work." "What kind of problems?" Emily sat up, showing a maturity that always surprised David. Sarah pulled up a chair, deciding to be honest. "Emily, do you remember when I explained that our clinic serves people who have money and people who don't?" "I remember. You said it's to be fair." "Exactly, but some people from the government think that's strange, so they came here to understand better how we work." Emily thought for a few seconds. "Do they want to shut down the clinic?" "No, sweetheart," David intervened. "They just want to make sure everything is in order." "And is it?" David looked at Sarah, who nodded. "It is. We just need to sort out some paperwork." "Then there's no problem," Emily concluded with the simple logic of a child. "If everything is in order, they'll let you keep helping people." During the afternoon, while Emily rested in the waiting room doing her homework, David and Sarah worked together to resolve the pending issues with the health department. They contacted suppliers, organized documents, and reviewed protocols. "David, can I ask you a question?" Sarah said during a break. "Of course." "Don't you regret leaving your delivery job to embark on this adventure with me?" David stopped organizing the papers and looked at her. "Sarah, do you want to know the truth?" "I do. For the first time in my life, I wake up in the morning excited to go to work. Before I worked because I had to. Now I work because I believe in what we're doing. Even with all these problems. Especially because of the problems." David smiled. When we solve a difficulty together, I feel like we're building something truly important. Sarah felt something tighten in her chest, a mix of gratitude and something more that she didn't want to name yet. And you know what else? David continued. Emily is seeing that it's possible to fight for dreams. She's learning that she doesn't have to accept what life offers. She can go after what she wants. At that moment, Emily appeared at the office door. Can I help with anything? I know how to organize papers. David and Sarah laughed, and for a few minutes the three of them worked together, organizing documents and checking lists. Emily sat between them, sorting papers by category with the seriousness of an adult. Done, she announced after half an hour. Now everything is organized. Sarah looked at the perfectly sorted documents and felt that perhaps the solution to their problems wasn't just bureaucratic. Maybe it was about continuing to do what they believed was right, with the right people by their side. Emily, Sarah said, would you like to be our official organization assistant? Emily's eyes sparkled. Can I really? Of course, David replied. Every family business needs the help of family. Family business, Emily repeated, enjoying the sound of the words. I like that. David and Sarah looked at each other over the top of the girl's head, knowing they had just officially defined what the Heart in Motion Clinic truly was. A family that had chosen to care not only for each other, but for everyone who needed care. And families fight together against any adversity. The call came on a Thursday morning when David was organizing the week's appointments on the clinic's computer. On the other end of the line, the trembling voice of Mrs. Johnson, Emily's school principal, made his blood run cold. Mr. David, you need to come here urgently. Emily fainted during recess and isn't waking up properly. David knocked over his coffee mug on the table, the dark liquid spreading across the papers. What do you mean she isn't waking up properly? She opened her eyes, but she's very confused, saying nonsensical things. We've already called the ambulance. No, don't let her leave there, David shouted, already grabbing his motorcycle keys. I'll be there in 5 minutes with her cardiologist. Sarah was attending to a patient when David burst into the office, his face transformed by panic. Sarah, it's Emily. She fainted at school and isn't waking up properly. Sarah immediately interrupted the consultation, asked the patient to wait, and in less than 2 minutes was by David's side on his Harley, racing through the streets of New York City toward the school. Calm down, David. We'll get there, examine her, and decide what to do, Sarah tried to reassure him while driving, but inside she felt the same anxiety. She was fine. This morning, Sarah, she had breakfast, played, was happy because she was going to present a project about the cardiovascular system. David, breathe. It could be 1,000 different things. Let's not panic before we know what's happening. They found Emily in the school infirmary, lying on an improvised stretcher, surrounded by the principal, Ms. Smith, and 2 paramedics who had arrived with the ambulance. The girl was conscious, but David immediately sensed that something was very wrong. Her gaze seemed lost, distant. Emily, sweetheart, Daddy is here. David knelt beside the stretcher, taking his daughter's small, cold hand. Dad? Emily looked at him, but her eyes took a few seconds to focus. Why am I lying down? Where's my backpack? Sarah approached, already with the stethoscope in hand. Hi, Emily. How are you feeling? Aunt Sarah, I was playing, and then I don't remember. I'm so sleepy. While Sarah examined Emily, checking her blood pressure, heart rate, and neurological reflexes, David watched every movement with growing despair. The paramedics waited for instructions, ready to take the girl to the nearest public hospital. David, Sarah whispered softly. Her heart is very fast and irregular. I need to take her to a hospital with a pediatric ICU now. Public or private hospital? Sarah hesitated for a fraction of a second, knowing the decision would change everything. David, In a private hospital, she will be treated immediately. In the public one, then let's go to the private hospital. It will cost a lot. It could be days of hospitalization, expensive tests. David looked at his daughter, who was struggling to keep her eyes open, and didn't hesitate for a second. I don't care if I'll be in debt for the rest of my life. Take her where it's best for her. Sarah nodded and approached the paramedics. We're going to Mount Sinai Hospital. I'll follow in my car. The journey to the hospital was the longest of David's life. He followed the ambulance on his motorcycle, seeing the emergency lights flashing over his daughter through the windows. Every red light felt like an eternity, every traffic movement a threat. At the hospital, David found himself again in a world that wasn't his. Marble corridors, impeccable staff, state-of-the-art equipment. But this time Sarah was by his side, translating medical terms, explaining procedures, ensuring Emily received the best possible care. Dr. Johnson will take over the case personally, Sarah informed David after 2 hours of tests. Despite our disagreements, he is an excellent professional. And the tests? What did they show? Sarah took a deep breath, preparing to deliver the news that would change everything. David, Emily's condition has worsened. What we discovered today is that she will need surgery. David felt the world spin. What kind of surgery? It's a complex procedure on the heart muscle. Without it, episodes like today will repeat and can be fatal. Fatal. David repeated the word, as if it were in another language. David, listen. It's a delicate surgery, but with high success rates when performed by an experienced team. Emily will be fine. And how much does it cost? Sarah fell silent for a few seconds. David, how much does it cost, Sarah? Between $200,000 and $300,000. David collapsed in the chair in the corridor, putting his head in his hands. All the money he had earned in his entire life didn't even add up to 10% of that amount. Is there any way to get it through Medicaid? There is, but the waiting list is 8 to 12 months. Emily can't wait that long. David raised his head, looking at Sarah with desperate determination. What if we sell everything? The clinic, the equipment, my motorcycle? David, that wouldn't even cover 10% of the cost. Then what do I do, Sarah? What do I do? His voice broke for the first time since Sarah had known him. Sarah knelt in front of his chair, holding his hands. David, we will find a way. I will find a way. How? I have some savings. I can get a loan. Sarah, I can't accept that. It's too much money. David, stop. Would you do this for me? Of course I would, but then let me do this for you. Emily is not just your daughter. She is our daughter now. David began to cry, silent tears of gratitude, fear, and mixed love. Sarah hugged him right there in the hospital corridor, knowing she was making a decision that would change her financial life forever. But she also knew that some decisions are not made with the head. They are made with the heart. And her heart had chosen that family long ago. We are going to save Emily, Sarah whispered. In his ear, I promise. David knew she was risking everything for them, and for the first time in his life, he allowed himself to fully accept the love and care of another person, because Emily was worth any risk, any sacrifice, any life change. And now he was no longer alone in protecting her. 6 months after Emily's surgery, David was on the balcony of the new apartment they had rented in Brooklyn, closer to the clinic, and with an extra room that Sarah used when she stayed late, caring for emergencies. The November sun warmed his face. As he watched Emily playing in the small garden of the building with other children, running and laughing without any limitations. The scar hardly shows anymore, Sarah commented, approaching with 2 cups of coffee in hand. She had swapped her lab coat for the floral dress that Emily had picked out for her on a shopping afternoon, the first time David saw Sarah buying clothes that weren't for work. The doctor said that in 2 years there won't even be a mark, David replied, accepting the coffee and making space on the bench for Sarah to sit. I still can't believe everything went well. The surgery had been a complete success. Dr. Johnson, despite the professional differences with Sarah, had operated on Emily masterfully, and the recovery was faster than anyone expected. In 3 weeks, she was back at school. In 2 months, she was playing normally again. In 6 months, the cardiologist, who was monitoring her, said her heart was functioning perfectly. "Dad! Aunt Sarah, come see!" Emily shouted from the garden, pointing to an orange butterfly that had landed on a rose bush. They went down together, David carrying Sarah on his back, who laughed like a child while he pretended she was very heavy. Emily watched them with that smile David knew well, the smile of someone who was completely happy and secure. "Look how beautiful," Sarah whispered, crouching next to Emily to observe the butterfly. "The teacher at school said that butterfly means transformation," Emily commented. "They change from ugly caterpillars to beautiful creatures that fly." David looked at Sarah, thinking about how they had all transformed over the past few months. The clinic was running perfectly, serving an average of 50 patients a week, half private, half referred from the public system. Sarah had become a reference in social pediatric cardiology, receiving invitations for lectures and consultations. David had enrolled in a technical course in hospital management at night, determined to understand every aspect of the business they had built together. His grades were the best in the class, and the professor had already mentioned that he had the profile to continue his studies at a university. "Dad, can I say something to you and Aunt Sarah?" Emily stood up, with that serious expression that always preceded her most important comments. "Of course, Princess. Go ahead." Emily looked at the 2 adults, then took a deep breath as if she were about to make a very important announcement. "I want Aunt Sarah to live with us forever." David felt his heart race. In recent months, Sarah had practically moved into their apartment. She slept there 3 or 4 nights a week, cooked with them on weekends, helped Emily with her homework, and attended school meetings. "Emily," David began, but Sarah interrupted him. "Emily, are you sure about this? I will always be in your lives, whether I live here or not. I know, Aunt Sarah, but it's different." Emily approached Sarah, taking her hand. "When you're not here, the house feels incomplete." David looked at Sarah, seeing the same emotion in her eyes that he felt. In recent months, they had become a family, in fact, even without ever formally discussing it. "And you, Dad? Do you also want Aunt Sarah to live with us?" David laughed, realizing he was being put on the spot by his own daughter. "Emily, this is a very important decision. Dad, do you like Aunt Sarah?" "Of course I do. She is our best friend." "No, Dad. Do you really like her, like boyfriend and girlfriend?" Sarah blushed violently, and David felt it was time to be completely honest. "Emily, Aunt Sarah is the most important person in our lives after you. She took care of us when we needed it most, risked everything to save you, and—" He looked at Sarah. "And I love her. Very much." "I love you both too," Sarah said, her voice choked. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." Emily clapped her hands as if she had just watched the happy ending of a movie. "So we are going to be a real family, David and—" Sarah looked at each other, knowing that the question from an 8-year-old had put into words what they had both been feeling for months. "If Aunt Sarah wants to, we have always been a family," David replied. "I do want to," Sarah whispered, and for the first time in months, the tears streaming down her face were of pure happiness. They embraced right there in the garden, the 3 of them together, while the orange butterfly flew around them like a silent blessing. 6 months later, at the civil wedding ceremony they held in the building's party room, With the presence of all the patients from the clinic, the staff, the neighbors, and Emily's entire class, David gave a speech that moved everyone. 2 years ago, I was a man who thought he knew what love was. I loved my daughter more than life itself, and I thought that was enough. Then I met a woman on a wet road, and I discovered that love can grow, multiply, and transform into something much greater than we imagine. He looked at Sarah, who was wearing the simple yet elegant dress that Emily had helped choose. Sarah taught me that accepting help is not weakness, it's love. She taught me that family is not just blood, it's choice. And she taught me that when two people decide to care for each other, they can move mountains. David turned to Emily, who was next to them with a flower crown on her head, radiant with happiness. And Emily taught me that the heart can heal from any problem when surrounded by enough love. 2 years later, when Emily turned 10 and the Heart in Motion Clinic had become a reference in social care in the city of New York City, David found a letter she had written to the school about her family. "My family is different from other families. My biological dad raised me alone. And when I got sick, a doctor he helped on the street became my heart mom. They didn't marry for romantic love first. They married because they were already a family before they even knew it. My teacher says this is rare. I think this is magical." David kept the letter in his wallet and carried it forever, as a reminder that the most beautiful miracles happen when someone stops on the road to help a stranger, not knowing they are saving their own life.